Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Leger. I'm the Executive Director for Citizens for a Healthy Community. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am so pleased to be able to co-host this with the Learning Council, Citizens for a Healthy Community, and the Learning Council to bring Rivera Sun back to the North Fork Valley to share her pearls of wisdom and her wonderful new book that's about to come out in the Dandelion series called Winds of Change, if I've got that correctly. And so tonight she is going to regale us with some sneak peek of the new book, as well as tee us up for our workshop that is starting tomorrow evening on Organize and Win, and really get us inspired for this 4-part strategic workshop series that we have over the month of October. So with that said, I want to welcome everyone this evening. I want to turn it over to Alicia Michelson with the Learning Council just to say a few words, and then we'll turn it over to Rivera.
Thanks so much, Natasha. I'm so happy to be here and to be working with you to co-host this series and bring Rivera back to the North Fork. And I am a huge fan of Rivera's writing. It's so engaging and current and fun to read, and also really educational. All of the books that I've read so far are, I learn something each time I read, and it's practical that we can use in our community as we work for change and we work for creating the world that we want to live in. So thanks so much, Rivera, for the great inspiration, and I can't wait to hear about the winds of change. So thanks for reading to us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me and for organizing this series of workshops and this book reading. I think all of us are craving deeply meaningful ways of connecting with one another, whether it's online or in person with social distancing. But after going through the pandemic and going through the incredible tumult that our country is in, I think we're craving ways to restore our sense of shared humanity, and to really kind of give us a sense that we are not as crazy as our headlines make us out to be. And I think the more that we can find ways to connect to that, the better off we're going to be. It's a time when the headlines and our news are trying to push us one way and push us the other. The things that we're seeing in our streets are deeply disturbing, but what we're not seeing in the streets is the everyday acts of being kind, being connected, and being unafraid, as we say in the Dandelion Insurrection. So tonight I'm going to share a little bit about writing the conclusion to the Dandelion trilogy, but I also want to talk a little bit about our current state, and I also want to talk a little bit about why these 4 workshops coming up in the North Fork right now. When we sat down to think about what could we do in terms of grounding and anchoring ourselves for living in a time of great change, how could we skill up and resource the entire North Fork community for not just one struggle, but many struggles that may be on your plate? What we came up with is that it's really important to create opportunities for learning that teach us both how to resist, but also how to do that in a resilient way. So in the next 4 Thursdays, we're going to look at things like flocks, swarms, and schools, a natural way of making change. So we're going to look at how the ecosystem theory can teach us how to make change. So arguably, evolution is the best change maker we've ever seen on the face of the planet. But we're also going to look at how to build power with localism and resilience. One hand of nonviolence always says no to the problem. It always stops the problem. And the other hand of nonviolence reaches out with the solution or the alternative. It builds the strength in our community to both be in a good place in general, but then also be able to wage a more resistance-based struggle. So we're going to talk about that, which will be very fun because the North Fork has so much going on for it in that department. On week 3, we're going to look at everyone belongs, beloved community and making change. We're going to look at a radical inclusivity and how to uproot notions of disposability in ourselves. We know how essential this is in our world and in our communities, but how do we go even deeper to not just the people that we love, but the people we might not see in our communities and the people we may be in conflict with. That's the big challenge, but we'll talk about that on October 15th. On October 22nd, we're going to conclude the series with a workshop that will be incredibly helpful for everyone. It's on de-escalation and active bystander training. Now, a lot of us are worried about the upcoming elections. Totally fair, totally valid. I'm worried too. One of the strategies is to ask people to be elections defenders, where you will actually go to your local polling place and you'll hopefully just stand around all day doing nothing. But in case conflicts do show up or intimidation do show up, active bystander training and de-escalation is what will help you know how to relatively safely intervene in a conflict that's brewing, or know how to make someone feel safe and welcome exercising their civic right to do elections. So this is something that's being used in that context, but we'll also talk about it in the context of doing demonstrations, or if you are at in-person public meetings, or even just at the supermarket. These are skills that all of us should know. And so week 4 of this series is going to help anchor us in those skills. It's a cornerstone of nonviolent struggle. So that's what we have coming up that we're preparing for. And I'm not sure if Natasha or Alicia, you want to weigh in on any of those thoughts, or if that's a good summary.
I think that is a great summary, and I am so looking forward to the workshops. And I think you've captured really so much of what we're all feeling between our own local struggles and our broader, more macro fears, frustrations, and anxiety, and how to help us work through that on really multiple levels.
Great, yeah. So one of the things that I've done a lot in my life is weaving fiction and reality together. It's the cornerstone of the Dandelion Insurrection series, which is inspired in many ways by the real stories that go on in our world. There are so many scenes in this book, for better or for worse, that when I first wrote it in 2000, well, I wrote it in 2012, it was released in 2013. A lot of the things in it were fairly speculative. We weren't seeing them on our event horizon, but unfortunately in the past 7 years, we've seen many of them come to pass. But on the other hand, we've also seen the good things come to pass. We have seen massive movements increasing in size and scale and effectiveness year after year after year. Even as we feel like we're backsliding in many ways, really the movements are growing in intensity. That's someplace to anchor your hope right now. The roots of resistance, when I wrote this book, really, this I wrote in 2017 or 16, not good on dates. But the goal with the book was to talk about exactly what we're seeing in our streets right now. What do we do when our street protests get chaotic? Maybe ourselves or a flank of our movement loses nonviolent discipline. Maybe we have infiltrators and agents provocateurs causing property destruction, sabotage, and outbreaks of violence. And how does that trigger repression? And what do we do about that? How do we roll back? How do we step back from that escalation? And so in some ways, The Roots of Resistance is even more timely now than when it was first released. It's a book that has a lot of reflections for us. It maybe evokes a lot of the things that we feel when we watch what's going on in our country. And it offers a few approaches and solutions for how to how to gather your movement together and anchor in what is really strategic, what's effective, and what perhaps is even closer to the core values of the movement. So the question is, what is Winds of Change about? Winds of Change is the third part of the Dandelion trilogy, and after ousting a hidden corporate dictatorship, after stopping an attempted power grab by a corporatist, now the Dandelions are trying to assert what I like to call real or participatory democracy. This is the kind of democracy where we in our communities sit down and make decisions together about the things that impact our community. It's not just in the halls of government, but it's in our businesses, in our schools, in our homes, in our social institutions, in our nonprofits. This is the kind of democracy that engages all of us together, that taps into our collective wisdom, that uses the practices that, some of which are ancient, they're very old, and some of which are newer, to engage the kind of knowledge that we all hold together. We know some of the concerns, we know some of the solutions, we know some of the challenges, and we may not have all of the truth, but we'll all have a piece of the truth. So participatory democracy is about tapping into that in the best possible ways. But as the Dandelions find out, it's also a very radical notion. It's a little challenging when we live in a world, in a culture in the US, where we don't practice democracy every day. The clothes we wear, the food we buy, the movies we watch are not made in by democratic process. They're pretty much chosen for us, and we're told what we should like and dislike, what we should buy and what we shouldn't buy. So when we try to change that, when we try to assert a different kind of way of self-governance, we're going to run into the old system. We're going to run into the fears of our culture. But we need to anchor ourselves in understanding why this is possible, how it works, and why it may actually deliver more justice, more equality, more hope for a future. Because right now our hope for the future is a little bit bleak, honestly. And as Extinction Rebellion is pointing out all over the world, we have a climate crisis, but we also have a democracy crisis, where even in the US, new studies just came out, even in the US, 2/3 to 3/4 of the US population wants all politicians to take immediate action on climate crisis. They want us to actually, they want to see us transition to renewable energy within 10 years. This is what we're told is an extremely radical goal, impossible, will never happen. But actually, this is what we, the people in the United States, want to see happen in our country. I find that mind-blowing, profound, inspiring, hopeful. It kind of restores some of my my hope or my faith in my US fellow citizens. And so in the Winds of Change, we're talking about what is it that we as populaces really want, and how do we make that happen? So I'm just going to pause for a minute and welcome our new guests to this evening's reading and talk and conversation about the Winds of Change, the Dandelion Insurrection, but also what's going on in our country and why anchoring ourselves in both resilience and resistance is really an excellent path forward for us. I want to just let my my co-hosts Natasha and Alicia chime in if you feel like. Is there any thoughts that are brewing or stirring in you?
Well, for me, am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. Well, for me, what really resonates with me is this concept of the narrative that we are fed. And, you know, especially in a coronavirus pandemic, COVID world, where we have these differing views on what we should or should not be doing, whether our rights have been trampled on or deprived, what it means to not only protect ourselves, but protect others, is, that whole narrative of the everyday pieces that we are fed, and we come to believe. But then when there's something, it seems like then when there's something political that really has that same type of pattern to it, there's this resistance to it. And so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, because there's so many narratives, or maybe there's only just a single narrative, that we're being fed, and we're led to believe that there are multiple narratives, and how we can potentially overcome that. And I guess the other piece for me that I think a lot about is really the role of the media in all of this, and how the media starts to really condition our way of thinking about things. And if we're really talking about resiliency and resistance to some of these things, how else do we build that power to resist what just seems to be like this overarching and overwhelming narrative? Sorry for the long question.
That is a long, complicated, knotted question, but it's a great question, and I could pick away at it. And if I don't get at the core of it with you, then ask it again in a different way. But I think, one of the things is we live in a time when our media is both simultaneously intensely non-democratic and intensely democratic. So we have both corporate media, which is incredibly consolidated, and we have everything on the internet, which is incredibly open, diverse, and possibly not particularly factual, and often being pumped out with a particular agenda that may run contrary to life and health and well-being of the citizens at large. It may be very beneficial to a certain group, but not beneficial to all groups. And so, I don't believe that we can have a democracy in half measures, even in a representative republic like the system that we have now, where we elect officials to make decisions for us. We can't have a healthy functioning democracy in a half measure. And so we need media that doesn't pretend to be objective, but this is maybe a little radical, we could discuss it, but we have a lot of media that's pretending to be factual, to be objective, but really everyone and everything has a slant. And I would rather have them own their slant and be straight up with it than to be pretending that they don't have a slant when they do. We definitely need to add critical thinking skills to standard curriculum if we want our citizenry to grow up able to parse through what is fact and what is fiction. We also need our citizenry right now to actively practice fact-checking themselves and their friends, to dig deeper into stories, to take that breath between reacting to a headline and taking action from that headline. Maybe for you and me, this means sharing a post that's a little bit more histrionic than the actual story deserves. But for other people, this is like young Kyle Rittenhouse grabbing his gun and going to Kenosha and ending up killing people. So we need to be actively practicing taking that breath between what we're seeing and what we're doing. And that sounds a little bit like a tall order in a time when things are very fast, things are very intense, and we think we need to act frantically all the time. But if we're acting frantically all the time, then we can never act strategically, because we simply cannot see the road and the landscape, and we may just jump off a cliff in our taking action. So yeah, that's why, to me, democracy has to be all across the board. We need to practice it in our homes, in our schools. We need to practice it in our businesses and in our nonprofits. And in the Dandelion Insurrection Part 3, there's a whole section where they challenge the country to do what they call the democracy challenge. And it's just do one little thing in everything that you're doing that asks someone else a question, that invites someone else's voice to weigh in on the decision you're making, that creates a situation in which other people's voices are held equal in conversation to your own. And this is the way that we democratize what we do, and we get in the practice of doing democracy. And I think these are things that any of us in our nonprofits, we can do surveys to determine what should the nonprofit be doing in our communities. You know, I could do polls on what's the next book I should write. In, you know, politics and governance, we could really be following the demonstrated will of the people. We could really be asking deep and meaningful questions in a way that isn't just about reaction, but is about deliberation, dialogue, contemplation, and tapping into the wisdom that not only is good for us, but also is something that we crave. Did that get at some of the questions you're asking?
You know, it's interesting. Something else that you triggered in my mind when you were talking about practicing democracy every day, which to me sounds a lot like, you know, it's practicing respect for people. I mean, when you ask for somebody's opinion, it's because you value that opinion. It's because you want to listen to what somebody else has to say, even though you may not agree with them, but you might actually get a different perspective on why they think one way or the other. And so for me, I mean, I just wonder about that when, you know, I'll take that to the next step, which is, if we're not practicing democracy every day, then in some respects that also means we're not practicing respect for other people and species and the planet on a daily basis. And what do we need to do to reinstitute that sense of relationship and that sense of value? What are some of the tools that we need to either engage in or skills that we need to master again? Because one of the things that you talk about so much is that these are all intergenerational issues, really. So what can we learn across that intergenerational path? Anyway, that's just kind of my thinking out loud on what you sparked by by mentioning that.
Yeah, two thoughts, and I just want to pause and invite any of our listeners this evening and to share any thoughts or reflections you have at this moment in the spirit of doing democracy.
Well, if I may speak, it's Millicent, and I find that racism is a grab for resources, and really every problem on earth seems like a grab for resources. So I've been studying the Virginia Satir model of human validation, and there's these two. I'm gonna go educational because you did, and I really enjoyed it, Rivera. But she has the hierarchical model and the organic seed model. So in hierarchy, people think that A plus B equals C, but events in the seed model are more like, oh, it's a whole conflagration of events that cause something to happen. It's not simply A plus B. And people are viewed not in terms of their roles, but what they can uniquely contribute. And what else is there about the hierarchical model versus the seed model? We've got to collaborate, and as you say, there's other aspects to it, and when I remember them, I'll try to chime in. I just wanted to put that in as a lens.
Great, thank you. sounds like it's one of the many answers to what Natasha was bringing up. Like, what are the learnings that we have to engage with to unravel this culture of domination and hierarchy that most of us have been brought up in, that we inherited, that has been built over several thousand years at least, but was not actually, it's not like it's human nature. That's what something that I think we have a misconception about, is that we have this image of cavemen walking around with their clubs and might makes right, but actually the archaeological record is not it's not confirming that notion. It's showing that humans were relatively peaceful for most of our existence, that we organized in non-hierarchical communities, which is pretty remarkable. We're also finding that democracies are very, very old. One of the things in the Winds of Change book is a sharing by a couple of characters around, you know, when we say ancient democracy, people in the US think Greece, ancient Greece, right? That's pretty old, but it's really not as old as something called the Commons. And this goes by a lot of names around the world, but the Commons is basically collective and democratic stewardship of a shared resource. And in today's world, it stretches all the way from like the lobster shoals off the coast of Maine to the irrigation ditches here in New Mexico to, you know, community forests, but also to things like Wikipedia, to digital commons, to toy libraries and tool libraries. It's just a very lively field. And the roots of this go back millennia. They're very, very old. And it shows that actually human beings, we know how to work out our problems together. We know how to do democracy. And so in this day and age, it's kind of upon us to revitalize those traditions within ourselves, but then to also, this is particularly keen point for those of us of European descent on this continent, that we need to start to recognize that human beings are not the only sentient or beings on some like flat movie screen landscape. That the ecosystem, as Natasha was pointing out, has thousands, billions of beings. Every ant, every rock, every stone, every rain cloud is a different kind of a being. And if we don't live with respect for those beings, then we're very soon going to find ourselves not welcome on this planet. And so, you know, that is a theme in the Winds of Change, is the rights of nature, the beingness of non-humans, and how do we navigate relationships in a way that is respectful, that is democratic, that respects the rights and well-beings of all these creatures. That's a tall order. That is one that is very challenging for people, but it's also very enlivening. Yeah. Tasha, anything you want to chime in on that note?
You said it all so eloquently.
Well, I can talk. It's something that I do.
I think that was, to me, that part of inclusivity, and it's beyond human and into the natural world. It brings so much, like you said, how enlivening it is, and also so much, it's so satisfying in so many ways, and so many, I think good things come with the more that we include in the conversation. And so to really think about that with democracy, of like, this is more than us as humans, even because our choices are impacting so many beings. And so the more that we can include, the brighter the story. And I think, like you're saying, just the better it feels and the stronger the work.
If I might play devil's advocate for a second, especially in terms of thinking of our climate crisis, because some would say that there are countries that do not have democratic principles that are further along in solving the climate problem. and they're able to mobilize more people, and that, you know, democracy, as much as we think it's a good governing system, is slow and messy. And so I was just wondering if maybe in Winds of Change, or just in general, you're thinking if you've kind of explored those two dynamics in terms of actually solving our greatest problems. Is, you know, how do we go, can we really accomplish that, I guess, in a slow democratic system? And the reason I'm also asking for that question is right now, you know, we're going through a number of rulemakings at the state level to try to really usher in the precautionary principle, and there is resistance to that because of just a lot of internal inertia. So I guess really what my question is, you know, how do you break through that? And if the answer is time, when we don't have time, you know, what do we do?
Yeah, so one of the things to think about is that in any system, political will is the operating force. So if you have a dictatorial system where the dictator is all about the caring for the ecology, even if he's repressing his people, or she, it could be she, then, you know, you're gonna see millions of trees planted. If you have a democratic system where the will of the people and the legislators are in favor of, you know, transitioning off of fossil fuels, you're gonna see that happen. But in either of those systems, when those active parties are not actually in favor of making those changes, you're not gonna see those changes happen, right? So cultivating political will is, first of all, incredibly important. Second of all, we need to assess our governmental structures to see how responsive or not they are to demonstrated political will, right? So in the US, many, like the situation you just described, what I see isn't a democracy, in my opinion. It's a representative republic, which is one particular kind of political system that we casually call democracy in the US, and I'm not sure is actually a great descriptor for it at this point. Because there's no checks and balance to your county commissioners, your local legislators, to say if you don't enact the will of the people, then consequences will happen. The only consequence is getting voted out in the next electoral cycle, which is a delayed consequence. It's not immediate. So yeah, for me, the question is, how do we cultivate political will in all of the parties, which often comes down to movements and social and cultural endeavors, things that are actually outside of even what we think of as a political process. But then also, how responsive are our systems to the demonstrated will of the people? So I think that's where I start to think about it, and it really isn't necessarily about this system or that system. I do think that participatory democracies are more responsive to the participants. And I do think that when it, you know, there have been studies done, and this is one that I love, about like McDonald's and Chinese restaurants. So those are two really different systems. McDonald's is a total monolithic top-down system of franchises that are controlled right down to the how long you put the fries in the fryer type of thing. And Chinese restaurants are decentralized. They're often, some of them are connected by loose ties, but they really aren't chains, generally speaking. But each of these systems will roll out new products nationwide in exactly the same time frame. So I find that fascinating. Like, you know, if you're going to introduce the next General Tso's chicken, it's going to roll out through all the Chinese restaurants in the country in exactly the same time as McDonald's going to roll out their new McBurger. So it's a reflection on systems, like what makes a system tick. And I think that is one of the key understandings for us in our world right now. In fact, that's a great reading that I can share from the book, since I haven't shared any readings yet. So at one point, if you'll indulge me, I'll read just a little section. Charlie and Zadie are at this place called the Democracy Lab. Now, there is a real democracy lab. This is a slightly fictionalized one. I love to take things from real life and adapt them, change them, and put them in a fictional context in the novels. And then at the back of my books, you'll often find the real life references cited so that you can go and look them up. If you want to go to the Democracy Lab or get on their mailing list, you can. And this particular book is going to have a glossary of democracy practices, everything from world cafes to citizen assemblies to deliberative dialogues and citizen polling. It's pretty exciting. In the ebook, we'll get to hyperlink it, which is even more exciting. So Charlie says, democracy is the science of our times, a social science, a field of inquiry and experimentation that involves all of us. The United States has fostered many waves of scientific curiosity, from the natural sciences to atomic physics to space exploration and genome mapping. We can expand the laboratories of democracy to the entire nation now. We can catalyze a mass experiment, or rather a mass movement of thousands of experiments. Because at the end of the day, democracy is not something that one person, me or you or Donald Trump, has the final answers to. Democracy, in its definition and meaning, is something that we invent together.
That is so beautiful. And I want to, without you giving away anything in Winds of Change, but I'm just wondering if you've identified one key game changer that your characters embraced in their struggle in Winds of Change, or if you don't want to answer it from Winds of Change, is what do you think is the one key game changer that's needed to flip the paradigm?
Yeah, so those are both great questions in fiction and reality. And I think in the earlier books, the Dandelion Insurrection's game changer was a wholehearted embracing of nonviolent struggle and nonviolent action. And to understand it as more than protests, but also boycotts and strikes, occupations, blockades, sit-ins, divestment, civil disobedience, tapping into that toolbox, which we now know is like over 300 different methods of nonviolent struggle. So that gave them power that was outside of the representative republic, which gave them a way to build a power that was equal to that held by the hidden corporate dictatorship that was occupying the halls of power in this fictional United States. In Winds of Change, the dynamic has changed because in some ways they won. They ousted the corporate dictatorship. They secured, a reasonable amount of seats for reasonable sorts of people. But they're still finding that every day Charlie and Zadie have to get up and mobilize the Dandelions to petition and call their senators and representatives. And that's the relationship, not the other way around. Like the senators are never calling them to ask, what are the hopes and dreams of this country? What are the things that would help you in your daily life? What are the ways that the federal government or the state government or the local government could serve the people that in ways that are meaningful, that are liberatory, that are resilient and game changers? We have majority numbers on so many subjects that we have political interaction on. Gun control, for example, or as we mentioned earlier, apparently we have political majority on climate change and climate action. So for me, the game changer in the Winds of Change is to introduce the idea that governance should be participatory, and public officials, if we're going to have them, should be actively engaged in discovering and enacting the demonstrated will of the people, which is not really the situation we have right now. So is that a good answer?
That is a good answer. And like so many of our discussions is, for me, I feel like there's this incredible back and forth, which is, I ask a question, you give a response, and I'm like, oh, that sparks another question. And which I just find so incredibly, inspiring for me. And I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I mean, there are others on here who probably have some questions, but it just sparked this concept in my mind all of a sudden about how power is really, for the most part, the way it's executed in our understanding is centralized, right? By the why don't I just call them the power brokers, for lack of a better term right now. But when we think about ecosystems, we think about the strength of an ecosystem is in its diversity. And so therefore, I think about resistance. The strength of resistance is actually in decentralization, not in centralization. And so I was just wondering kind of your thoughts on it. That's kind of how I'm gauging the two, the two extremes right now, right? Because we've got this power faction that seems to be incredibly unbalanced with the direction of where the world is going. And so what is the best way to resist that?
Yeah, or best ways. One of the early learnings when I started researching for Winds of Change and sat down with people who are, far more expert in democracy than I am, was this constant message to me of, it's not about one solution. It's not about one perfect system of democracy. It is about the many different forms of democracy, the many different solutions. It's about empowering the responsiveness of the system to adapt to local conditions in ways that serve the needs of the people. That the solutions that we come up with are unique. They're like niche species in ecosystem theory. That what might work in Minneapolis isn't what's going to work in LA, isn't what's going to work in North Fork, isn't what's going to work in Taos. But every single one of those systems can figure out ideas that work for their community. Particularly in this day and age when we have we have the ability to access the collective wisdom of pretty much the entire planet. But the internet has really empowered knowledge sharing in ways that we've rarely had access to at this scope and scale. And the other thing that I might mention is that, marginalized communities or people of color, Native communities, and First Nations, they are already doing a lot of this work. Particularly Indigenous nations have a really sophisticated understanding of the difference between the representative republic system, which was imposed upon them, and their own tribal democracy systems. US democracy is deeply informed in some ways by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, but when the Haudenosaunee, some of the members of the tribes that are part of that came and saw what Benjamin Franklin and the founding fathers set up, they were like, what have you done to our system? Where are the women? How can you have a system of government that does not include the non-human beings? This is doomed to failure. Like right off the bat, they figured that out. So, yeah, I feel like I maybe detoured from your question a little bit, but I think it is important to think critically about these questions right now and to look for ways to empower that kind of collective wisdom, because I think what we'll find is that we are way more human and humane than our current system is making us out to be. In fact, there's this amazing phenomenology of democracy that it is, by its nature, participatory democracy is de-escalatory to conflicts because it's empowering of the people in a conflict coming together to resolve their problems. And a great film that shows this in under 2 hours is a film called Best of Enemies. And Best of Enemies follows the story of you could call it a democracy project in 1971, when Durham, North Carolina had to decide whether it was going to desegregate its schools or keep them segregated. And they used the charrette process, which brought together over 1,000 different community members over, I think it was a 10-day period, in a wide variety of exercises, that some of which acted a little bit like encounter groups. And the organizing team were two people who hated each other at the time: a Black organizer woman and a white man who was actually in the leadership of the local KKK. And the two of them were pitted, they ended up pitting themselves against each other to get more people there than the other, which was how the system took off. But what ended up happening was so profound. This charrette process had actual voting power. At the end of the 10 days, I think it was like 10 board members, informed by the whole community's responses, were going to vote for or against desegregation, and that's what was going to happen. And what ended up happening, the deciding vote, was this KKK guy. And he actually voted to desegregate the schools, because what he had learned and experienced, the way he had spoken with Black people, the relationships that he had built in those 10 days were so transformative that he could no longer support the racism that he had imbued up to that point. So
Yeah,
those are the kind of stories that inspire me.
and
Yeah,
the real people were in that film. I saw that film. Those were the real people that went through that. Are the Haudenosaunee, are those the Cherokee Six Nations, or those?
I think those are the Iroquois, like the overlap of the Iroquois, and I'm a little embarrassed to say I don't know all the names of the tribes that are the nations that are involved in that. Something to look up.
I have a poem I would like to share from 1764, a nursery rhyme. Little children were saying this. They hang the man and flog the woman that steal the goose from off the common, but let the greater villain loose that steals the common from the goose. The law demands that we atone when we take things we do not own, but leaves the lords and ladies fine who take the things that are yours and mine. So I'm wondering about this idea that you know, the most people get to decide things, because somehow we really have to make sure nature has a say, because a lot of times people decide to frack or whatever they decide that is really not the right decision. I mean, yeah. So I'm wondering, I mean, how can we make sure nature has, well, Natasha's been doing it with environmental laws. Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, actually, that was one of the most lively parts of writing Winds of Change for me, is looking into the rights of nature, which there are far more of these than I ever knew. Like Lake Erie, for example, thanks to an anti-fracking campaign, by the way, or a group that was also doing anti-fracking work, got the rights of nature for Lake Erie, and that restricts the ways that humans are technically allowed to pollute by giving the lake its own set of beingness. So the rights of nature have been used in Ecuador. Rivers in New Zealand have their own rights. And there's over a dozen examples that I ran across very easily by just Googling rights of nature. But there's a lot of other systems. In the book, I show a scene of a council of all beings, which is a kind of a ritual assembly invented by Joanna Macy in the work that reconnects, where humans take on the characters of various other beings and have an assembly to dialogue, to discourse, to think outside of their human-centric worldview, and to start to enliven the ways that we can see and perceive outside of our human experience. And then there's also things like the Great Lakes Commons, which is this incredible project. You just cited the Commons in your amazing poem. The Commons have a major part of the book as well, because Commons are democracy and the ways that we navigate our relationship to other beingness. So the Great Lakes Commons is an international group of people from First Nations, Canada, and the US. And they form living relationships with the lakes and then act as a unified group of people across international and state boundaries to advocate and work on behalf of the beingness of the lakes. They work in a lot of different really interesting ways, including ritual assemblies and also, you know, legislative action, and then also some nonviolent direct action at times. So those are some answers, and there are undoubtedly more.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question in the chat, which is, what happens when the will of the people is not clear, when there is not an overwhelming majority?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And what I ran across in my research for the book is that there are, you know, if we're not clear as a people, why are we moving forward, right? Why isn't that a moment when we need to have deeper dialogue, deeper learning, deeper understanding, right? Reinvigorate the practice of civic discourse and deliberative dialogues. You know, one of the things that's a big question in the democracy fields is simply a majority enough? Or how much of a majority should we have? Or do we need 100% consensus? And who needs to be in what decisions? Do we all need to be in all decisions? Or do we need to have stakeholders involved in the decisions? You know, the disability rights movement, or the differently abled movement, gives us a slogan that is so beautiful. And their slogan was, "No decisions about us without us." And if we all took that slogan to heart, we'd really find that that alone, that sentiment alone, would radically overhaul the way that we do decision making in the United States. But Allison, I'm not sure I have like one great answer for you on that, because there are a lot of different systems, and also I think it is a great line of inquiry. I think asking the question and digging into that answer is worthy and is part of what we should be doing in our communities and in our country, probably.
I really like that, no decisions about us without us. That, to me, that captures so much of some of the frustrations that we have in our various struggles of not being heard by those in power to make the decisions.
You know, Natasha, one reason I teach nonviolent struggle is because, to me, nonviolent action is another form of democracy. Fundamentally, it is how we withdraw our cooperation and consent from a problem and put it in the solution. And to me, that is people-powered democracy. That is how we say, yes, we're going to do this, or no, we're not going to do this. And we vote with our feet, we vote with our bodies, we vote with our wallets, we vote with our daily actions, we vote by refusing to obey, or by cooperating with a good project. And to me, the two are completely, they're inseparable. In fact, I think in the book, this became an outtake, like it didn't actually get in the book, unfortunately. But I consider nonviolent action to be the fourth check in the systems of check and balance. And just like we have the judicial branch, and we have the legislative branch, and we have the executive branch, the will of the people is the ultimate check and balance to that system. And we as people have the right to refuse to accept what is going on in any of the other branches. And we don't exercise our power as much as we could, as much as our global citizens have, honestly. The field of nonviolent struggle is full of stories of people power. One of the great ones is in the Philippines. So many people know about the people power revolution in, I think, 1989 in the Philippines. But there was actually a people power revolution #2. And this was years later. A president had actually been elected, but then a massive corruption scandal was revealed. And the Congress refused to enter articles of impeachment according to their constitution. So the people held a massive general strike and protests, like filling the streets for, I think it was 3 days they did this, saying, if you won't impeach him, we will shut down the whole country. And ultimately what happened was the president resigned rather than having the Congress impeach him. But I love that story because it reminds us that we have the power to do things like this. What we often lack in the US is political will and political clarity. And part of that is the way that the two-party duopoly taps into kind of conquest ideology and sports teams ideology, and they line us up on the camps of the left and the right, and they keep us colliding together. And as long as we're always doing this, we will always be upset about, I don't want to say minor issues because they're not minor issues, but they're pieces of the things that we as a populace care about. And we spend all our time fighting over them, and we don't have time to work on other things that we're actually united on. 2/3 of Americans, for example, want women to have access to abortion and reproductive care. 2/3, who knew, right? So I've been doing a whole series of looking at what are our majority issues in this country. The majority of this country, like 3/4 of the country, wants us to decrease military spending. Right? So there we have, today we've talked about 4 issues that we are told we are deeply divided on, but actually the polling shows that we the people are not divided on these things. Fascinating.
That is super fascinating.
Yeah. So, you know, in the Dandelion series, one of the things that fiction has empowered me to do is to extrapolate and to kind of frame certain ideas in certain ways so that we see them perhaps a little bit more clearly. And when we do that, we're able to like turn the volume down on some of our usual noise and turn the volume up on things we spend less time listening to, but things that are maybe critically important that we pay attention to. So I'm wondering if Alicia or anyone has any questions or comments, thoughts, or reflections. Since we're talking about democracy so much, I'll ask you.
Thanks. Yeah, I love how the conversation's going, and I of course realized about the duopoly, but I haven't heard that word before, so that was a really good one for me because, I have in this election, it's just like, yes, that's exactly what I'm seeing happening, and like, I couldn't really watch much of the debates last night because I watched a little and it was just so frustrating. And it's like they're having the same conversation over and over again, and they're not really evolving. And it's like we were talking about earlier of how the evolution is kind of, it's destined to happen, and it's kind of fueling some of these undercurrents and also these unifications that you're talking about. And so I'm really thinking about, like, okay, 2/3 of the people want reproductive rights. Like, that should be a thing then. Like, why are we even arguing about this anymore? And why is it a point of contention? It should just be how it is. And if you don't want it, you don't choose it, and rather than, this really threatening conversation that is so disempowering to women and their right to choose and all of these things. And the same with those other topics that you mentioned. And so, so for me, I just think that really looking at these things in this way and thinking like, okay, so how can we be proactive and organize? And so I'm really excited to carry on with the series and get more clear in that kind of organization and ways to really unify and be strong in our power of the majority that we have. And so, so hearing those kind of stats is really, really great and empowering. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Yeah, Allison, I'm not sure about your question. Could we agree on the polling? Could we agree? I'm not sure what that question is. If you want to clarify it, I'm happy to address it.
Okay, I guess I took a leap there, sorry. When I agree that there's a lot more agreement on various issues in this country. And the reason we know that, or we believe that anyway, is polling, I assume. So will we, ever agree on what the polling tells us? Because as we know, unfortunately, that's part of the problem, is that everybody's in, statistics. What do they say? Statistics lie, and lie, whatever that is. That's part of the problem, is that we cannot, as you've been pointing out, agree on a common ground on that, the partisanship, the level of partisanship. And as you saw in the movie that you were talking about, the documentary about Social Dilemma, everybody is in their own personal echo chamber. There is, that's the big deal. Mm-hmm. No recognized commonality. We're all defending our places. So through this process, we definitely need to figure out dialogue, meaningful dialogue. And that's why, I'm here to check it out. But the polling, how are we going to be able to point at something solid and say, this is what's going, can we agree on this Rorschach test that we're looking at together?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a great point, because, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier about democracy can't be a half measure. Even if we stick with the representative republic that we have in the US, we cannot have a functional political culture if we continue to have media of all types that is driven with these algorithmic intentions of dividing and polarizing and getting us into histrionic states of anxiety and panic and fear and hatred. Yep. This is not going to work. Also, one of the things that the participatory democracy offers us as tools is a whole toolbox of ways to get people in a room together and to get them hearing and listening to each other, not having that interaction be mediated by a news source, mm-hmm. right? And amazingly interesting things happen. One of the key ones for me as a nonviolent strategist and someone who would really like us to see us avoid another civil war or vigilante violence, more of it, is that being in a Zoom room together versus seeing each other through the lens of media helps us engage our empathy neurons. We're actually hardwired as human beings mm-hmm. to want to empathize with each other, to want to understand each other. And why this is so important is because violence relies on dehumanization.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we cause violence to another human, our empathy neurons make us feel that violence ourselves personally. Not to the same degree as physical violence, but emotionally. That's what PTSD is often about. So one of the reasons I think democracy is so key is to de-escalate these increasing spirals of hatred and fear that are based on like shadowy figures of those people over there, those types of people, or these kind of people, right? That allow us to start to live in these fantasies, these delusions of what our country is.
I agree. I'm very curious and look forward to understanding ways, ideas to have, like Paonia, or I mean, Delta County. It's small enough that you could go to the various public meetings, and sometimes you can have sway, but the number of people who are participating in our local democracy is getting the results that low participation rate has. So yeah, it's every organization I know of is like struggling with attention. We all, and in this little town, not everybody's on the cable television. So I don't know where people are.
And that's something like, as we start to enliven this sense of democracy, we start to ask questions about where are people? How do we engage them? How do we make sure that the people we don't usually see are part of the conversation? And how do we do this in creative ways? Because one of the things I learned while researching for Winds of Change was that I think of democracy as something that we like sit down in this room together and talk it out, right? That's like just one little tip of the iceberg. I mean, you could do billboard democracy. You could do bus ad democracy. You could do, radio show call in democracy. You could do YouTube video could be democracy. Like you could use every single medium that we have ever invented as human beings to facilitate the process of people resolving their conflicts and disputes together, coming up with creative solutions to the problems that we face. And that actually engaging many mediums in this work is vital to being as inclusive as possible, which is vital to tapping into that collective wisdom that we all hold. So yeah, it's a lively field. I mean, one of the big challenges in writing the novel was fitting in just a fraction of what's out there, right? And then making it part of a story and not just a nonfiction book on participatory democracy. So I'm noticing that we're coming down to the end of our time together this evening, and this has been a wonderful time. I thank you all for listening to me and sharing your thoughts and reflections. I do encourage you to come to the 4 webinars that we're going to be doing. They'll be nurturing, let's say. There'll be grounding, there'll be centering, there'll be practical, and there'll be actually probably a lot of fun. So it's a great way to spend your Thursday afternoons. And May, thank you so much for joining us. I know that, sometimes other things conflict in our life, but I'm glad you could make it here.
Thank you so much, Rivera. So great for you to do this for us, with us.
Yeah. So I'd love to read just one more section of the book. Is that all right? Would you enjoy that?
Mm-hmm.
So this is my favorite section. And you guys might have done a murmuration exercise when I was there in Paonia in person. But a murmuration, in case you don't know, is when the starlings do these amazing flocking patterns across the sky. And they're guided by 4 principles. They fly forward, largely because birds don't fly backwards. They stay equidistant. They don't leave their wingmate out on the limb, so that if one bird goes off another direction, other birds go with. So they're always in clusters, but the clusters keep changing and weaving back together again. And whoever is in the front of the flock as it turns is the momentary leader. But as soon as they turn further, whoever's in front is going to change. So that little bird becomes the leader. And the murmuration is a model that I've used in trainings to teach leaderful movements, not leadered or leaderless, but leaderful, where we share leadership and pass it. But in Winds of Change, we take it to the next level, and this massive murmuration takes place in San Francisco as a climate action, as a way of invoking into this urban space the patterns and the rhythms of the rest of the natural world. So I'm going to read you that section. So one of the characters' names is Starling, and then Zadie, you probably know already. On the ground, Starling and Zadie turned slowly, following the motions of the nearest people as they stood in the heart of a giant murmuration. Zadie had never seen anything so beautiful, elegant, masterful, peaceful, strong. Here, a sense of calm settled like sunlight. The bustle of the city fell away. They lifted their arms and rotated like a field of sunflowers. They stepped forward in the rhythm of antelope herds. They stilled like watchful birds, then darted into motion, swooping and diving. The shape of the mass of people rippled and contracted, shifting direction moment to moment. They flooded the streets. They drifted onto the sidewalks. They charged along crosswalks. On the outermost rims, the murmuration monitors in orange vests halted traffic and handed out flyers explaining that the murmuration was a reminder, a dance of respect to all living beings, a way of invoking the ecosystems of the world in the heart of a financial district whose decisions affected the entire planet. They moved like rivers curving and churning. They rippled like shoals of fish and mimicked the swooping wings of manta rays. They banked and turned in avian spirals. All of life swept through them. The patterning of clouds, amassing, swelling, breaking open into rain. The upward curls of unfurling ferns. The loping gambol of the wolf pack. The thundering gait of bison herds. The leaping flight of deer and dolphins. The slow sunning of turtles on logs. The earth, she thinks in circles. She dreams in spirals and nautilus shell revolutions. She paints in sprays of wildflowers, clusters of lichens, stands of trees. She moves in tidal dances, backwards and forwards, in stretches of time too long for human conception. She tells her stories across eons. Her epics are epochs. Humanity is not excused from this dance. Every breath of air entering our lungs weaves the ever-shifting formations of clouds into our blood. The circumambular journey of the sky feeds into our cells. The phytoplankton riding the ocean swells wind up in our veins, transform. Invisible, they hitch a ride on water molecules, climb the elevator of evaporation, gather into cloudbursts, and split into rivers, only to reunite in our bodies after a journey across entire continents and ocean currents. Awe, sheer wonder, is the only acceptable response to the majesty of Earth. This murmuration, pulsing in the heart of a glittering city, swarming through the streets like salmon runs of old, swooping and diving in a flock hundreds strong, was more than a protest. It was a prayer, a ritual, an invocation of the earth in places that had forgotten how to think in circles and cycles, curves and spirals. With it, the rules of natural systems crashed into the opium dream fantasies of the line and grid human madness. Their feet lifting and falling, not in march step unison, but in patterned waves of rippling subtle drum rolls, reverberated through the tar, into the ground, down, down into the shivering fault line that trembled beneath the city, a reckoning built by plate tectonics and continental shifts. The murmuration was more than a protest statement, it was a return of reverence. With it, they laid their human lives upon the altar of the planet and swayed and swarmed back into the ancient dance their species had forgotten. They did not speak, they listened, and their rusty animal alertness crept back into their limbs. They let their presence proclaim their message. They allowed the unexpected sight of hundreds of humans embodying the primal patterns that had birthed and nurtured their species for millennia shock and baffle passers-by. Spectators gaped, still caught up in the doings built by humans. Drivers blew their horns when the murmuration blocked the street, resenting the interruption of their headlong rush to extinction. And still, there was the woman in tears on the street corner, filming with her camera, unable to explain why this movement evoked despair and hope in the very marrow of her bones. There was the old man at the outdoor cafe, cream overflowing his coffee cup as he stared in wonder, a smile crinkling his face. There were the children who tugged their harried mother's arm, pointing to the magic breaking through the bustle of commercial mundanity. There were those who saw and understood the beauty dancing before them, those who paused amidst the day and let the murmuration call them back to their human nature, the one built in ocean's womb and birthed in primordial times, the one entwined to moon cycles and seasonal minuets in a world more wild than tame. When the murmuration turned the corner, these humans stepped forward transformed, and they in turn transformed their world in small and large ways, choosing the lighter footprint, stepping gently on this beloved earth, cradled by their abiding interconnection with a living world.
Bravo.
That
Yeah,
was
thank you.
beautiful. I can see why that's your favorite.
Yeah. That sense of reverence and interconnection is something that I'm trying to bring into all of the work that I'm doing, whether it's teaching strategies for nonviolent change, doing public speaking, writing novels, because I feel it's what we're hungry for. I feel it's what will guide us into reconnection and help us heal the outstanding traumas and pains and wounds and hardships that we hold in ourselves and in our communities. And it'll help guide us into that sense of how profound and how beautiful we are as human beings. And the fact that we have these innate capacities to resolve the problems that we face, and that we are far more powerful than we think. So thank you, Natasha and Alicia, for gathering people for these events, for tonight's event, for the workshops on Thursdays, for the next 4 Thursdays. And thank you for being the kind of stewards of the human heart and soul and spirit in your community in the different kinds of work that you do.
Thank you.
And also, Rivera, it's a real joy to be embarking on this journey together. Looking forward to the next 4 Thursdays.
I'd just like to say for those that have not been exposed to Rivera before and her writings, I hope this was a taste of what's to come by embarking into her literature, which is just so powerful, wise, and inspiring. So I want to recommend all of her books. And if you haven't already registered for the workshop, please do so. And looking forward to more from you over the next 4 weeks. Thank you.